I just recorded a video talking about Pokemon and Monster Hunter Stories 3, and I felt like I was kind of leaning more towards the Pokemon side of things. So right now, the narrative is that Monster Hunter Stories 3 looks great, that it plays great, that it looks way better than Pokemon, that it's going to be way better than Pokemon, that it's going to be this amazing game, and no, okay. I have played all three of the Monster Hunter Stories games. Okay, I've played the demo for 3. I played through a good chunk of the original, and I played like a little bit of 2. And all of these games are complete slop. They don't understand the Monster Hunter IP. They haven't been able to turn it into an interesting spin-off series. Like the stories aren't interesting, the characters aren't fun, the mechanics aren't are engaging. Like, these games are complete slop. And what makes this really frustrating is how, ever since the second one came out, there's been this huge push to try and gaslight people into thinking this series is somehow better than Pokemon. Like, I've seen a lot of people come out and say this, that like, oh yeah, these games are way better than Pokemon, they look way better, and like, the reality is, first of all, no, they don't. The environments are stilted, the environments are just like basic and uninspired. The animations are bad. The combat especially, I think, is what kills it for me. It has this weird like rock paper scissors system where you have like power, speed, and technical attacks, and it's just like all you have to do is just like figure out what attack like your enemy favors, and then just like choose the other thing. Like it's clearly trying to ape off the Pokemon thing, but doesn't really understand what makes it engaging or fun, right? It really feels as if this game clearly, truly, genuinely has no idea what it wants to be, right? Because, like, raising monsters in this game isn't fun or satisfying. Going into combat isn't satisfying. Going into the story isn't fun. Like, the games are just, like, these huge messes, honestly, and I just don't understand why so many people are willing to like try and gaslight you and pretend that they're huge fans, when in actuality these games are completely nothing burgers, and only really coast off of the success of the Monster Hunter IP. It's kind of like how people try and tell you that like Dragon Quest Monsters is better than Pokemon, when first of all, that came out after Pokemon. Dragon Quest V had the monster recruiting mechanic, but it wasn't nearly as fleshed out. So like Dragon Quest Monsters comes out after Pokemon. It's technically a knockoff title, right? It's trying to do what Pokemon does, and yet like it doesn't do it nearly as well, right? That's kind of what Monster Hunter Stories is doing, right? Like, it's trying to be Pokemon, it's trying to give it its own presentation, it's trying to be something original, but at the end of the day, if it wasn't attached to, like, a pre-existing IP, it never would have gotten the momentum it did, okay? That's the only reason these games continue to get made, is because they're able to slap the Monster Hunter label onto it. And people who haven't played these games look at them, and they're just like, oh yeah, that looks like it might be good, I think it's very telling how, like, people look at games like Monster Hunter Stories 3, and they don't say to themselves like, oh yeah, I'm really looking forward to playing that. I think that looks interesting. Like, no. Instead, they do this thing where they try and say that Monster Hunter Stories 3 looks and plays way better than Pokemon. Never mind that that's not actually true. Never mind that that doesn't make any sense. Never mind that, like, Monster Hunter is a completely different thing, which should be going for a specific style and tone. Like, no. Because Monster Hunter Stories 3 is trying to rip off Pokemon, suddenly that makes it this brand that, like, needs to be supported and worshipped, at least up until the game actually comes out. And then you're, like, not going to hear anything about it again. Like Monster Hunter Stories 3 seems to be this year's Digimon Time Strangers, a game that came out, was a complete nothing burger. Nobody talked about it at all. Nobody cared. Nobody hyped it up. And yet, like, for some reason, there was this very niche like a demographic of people who really went to bat for it, saying that like it was a great game, saying it was better than Pokemon, saying it was like that Digimon was like gonna take over and like be this huge thing. Not going to happen. Like Digimon does not have the brand synergy that Pokemon does. Whereas like something like Monster Hunter only succeeds because of like the very successful mainline games, like Pokemon is set up in a way where like each aspect of it kind of leans into each other, right? Where they release new Pokemon around the same time, where like, you know, you have TCG sets coming out all the time, where you have like the anime adapting like game material and game material like showing you like all the new regions and the world and all that. Like there's so much to see and do in Pokemon. It's kind of remarkable, and it's kind of amazing that anybody believes that something like Monster Hunter Stories can even compete with it, you know? And to me, I do think it needs to be said that like the people who are hyping up Digimon, hyping up Power World, hyping up Monster Hunter Stories, or nonsense like Temtem, like these guys aren't interested in the genre. They aren't interested in RPGs. They aren't interested in like monster collecting or like this genre. If they were, first of all, you wouldn't see people like try and argue that like Pokemon has a monopoly, because they clearly don't, because like plenty of these brands still exist and do reasonably well. What they can't do is compete on Pokemon's level, and that's kind of the point. Is that something like Monster Hunter Stories 3 is never ever going to be able to compete with Pokemon, because the IP isn't as like well thought out. It doesn't have like as good of a gameplay loop or a formula. It doesn't have like good designs. It doesn't have good mechanics. It's not something that people keep coming back to decades after the fact, you know? Like in a lot of ways, people really underestimate just how good Pokemon actually is. And that's been a very reoccurring problem for the past 30 years, you know, where people really seem to have this mindset that like Pokemon is simplistic and like a kid's game, but don't really understand the value of that. You know, they don't really understand how Pokemon has been growing and evolving over the past several decades, and how something like Digimon and Monster Hunter just has been kind of stagnant in comparison. It's kind of remarkable in this sense, where Monster Hunter initially was this huge deal and has just kind of slowly been falling off. And I have to wonder if like Stories 3 and Wilds is going to be the beginning of the end of like the Monster Hunter zeitgeist, where it just kind of like reaches its natural like falling off point, its decline. If that happens, this is going to be another franchise that went up against Pokemon and failed. Like if that happens, this is going to be another Yokai Watch, you know, and I think people aren't really prepared for what's going to happen when that comes to pass, because I think we are like on the verge of people starting to notice how good Pokemon is compared to the competition. I do think the more you bitch and seethe about Pokemon, the more people are gonna like start pushing back against it. The more it becomes apparent that like the coping and seething is just ridiculous. Like Pokemon's really interesting because the people who complain about it always claim that like Pokemon is boring now, and that like they that it wasn't as good as when they were kids. But like what's actually happening is that they're growing out of it, you know. And there's nothing really wrong with that from any kind of perspective, right? Like you should get new interests as you get older. You shouldn't like expect to play every single Pokemon game. Like I don't think the Pokemon company expects you to consume every single Pokemon product that gets made. But like for the community, there's this mindset that like, no, if I don't buy every Pokemon game, and if I'm not happy with everything that comes out, like the Pokemon company is falling off and they're failing. And I just don't think that's true. Like that's kind of my mindset on this. Like, you know, people really do need to accept that eventually they're going to grow out of Pokemon. They're going to grow out of video games. They're going to get old and die, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, that's kind of my perspective on this, is that like Pokemon itself is doing very, very well. It's the player base that are aging out of it and are spurging out about stupid shit like this. It's and that's kind of my mentality on it. Like, if you're not interested in Pokemon anymore, fine, but don't talk about it, don't obsess over it, and certainly don't try and gaslight people into thinking the quality has gone down, because it absolutely 100% has not.